Hello everyone, so this is Ahmed Sayed, the language certificates trainer, and today I'd like just to give you an idea about the English language certificates that exist in the market, that exists all over the world, and I would like just to focus on the certificates that are prepared here in Morocco. By the end of my presentation, I hope that you will have, let's say, a clear idea about the most important certificates. Okay, so let's start. Okay, as you can see here, there are many English certificates that are prepared by different organisms and different schools. So as you can see, we have the English proficiency test, we have the TOEIC test, IBT TOEFL, the IELTS, GMAT, SAT, and the BULETs. So each certificate is different from the other. Knowing that all of them, they try just to test the four skills of the language. And when we say the four skills of the language, we mean simply the listening, the reading, the writing, and the speaking. The TOEIC, when we talk about the TOEIC firstly is the test of English for international communication. And as you can see here is that the structure of the test is very clear. It consists of two important parts, which are the listening and the reading, which means that the test tries to test your listening competence and your reading one as well. So you will have a listening test which is going just to be followed by a reading one. Okay, now as you can see from here, so this is the listening skill. So you have the TOEIC test and you have the new TOEIC test, okay? And then let's try just to see what's different from the old, to the new one, okay? So for the TOEIC test for the listening comprehension, it consists of 100 items. So when I said 100 items, I mean simply 100 questions, and it is the same for the new TOEIC test. So which means there is no big difference from the old one and the new one. So the students have to do 100, let's say, questions. These 100 questions actually they consist of 4 parts. So the first part is called photographs. Okay, so in photographs you will have to do 20 questions. In the old TOEIC test and in the new one, you will have only 10 questions. Okay, so you can see a photograph in front of you, and then you will listen to sentences about this photograph, and then you have just to choose the right sentence or the sentence that best describes the photograph. And once you finish the first types of question, which are about photographs, then you move to questions and response. And as you can see, there is no big difference. The old TOEIC test consists of 30 questions and the new one 30 questions. So what do you mean exactly by question response? By question response, which means that you will have a stimuli which is followed by, let's say, by different responses, okay? And then you have just to choose the right response for that stimuli, okay? And then once you are done with the second part, you move on to the third one. In the third one, as you can see, there is a difference between the old one and the new one. Okay, so in the old TOEIC test there were 30 questions. Now you will have actually 30 questions, but only with 10 conversations. Okay, with 3 questions each. Okay, unlike the past, when you had to do 30 questions, but 30 conversations with 1 question each. So once again, the difference is that you will have to do 10 conversations and with 3 questions each. So in total, it's 30 questions. So the number of the questions, they are the same. There is no big difference, okay? But the number of conversations, they are actually, they are less, okay? So they moved from 30 to 10. Now, once you finish the third part, you have to move to the last part. So in the last part, so it's talk, okay? You have to do 20 questions, okay, in the old TOEIC test, but in the new one, as you can see, you have to deal with short talks, 30 questions, 10 talks with 3 questions each. So this is all about the listening skill, right? Now, let's now move on into detail. So I would like now just to give you an idea about the structure of the test, okay, of the listening test. So the listening sections takes almost 45 minutes, okay? So as I have explained to you before, there are 4 parts, okay? Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, and Part 4. So in the first part, there are photographs, so 10 questions. The second part is question response, or as I called it, it's a stimuli response, 30 questions. And the third part, you have to do conversations, 30 questions, 10 conversations with 3 questions each. And the last part is talks, 30 questions, 10 talks with 3 questions each. As I told you, you have to do it in 45 minutes. Okay. Now let's move on to the second part of the test, which is the reading skill. And here, as I did with the listening, I try just to show you the difference between the old TOEIC test and the new TOEIC test. Okay, so for the reading, you have 100 questions, 100 items. It's like the listening, so there is no big difference between the old TOEIC test and the new one. So you have to do 100 items as in the past. Okay, and here the first part, it's incomplete sentences, which means that sentences which are not complete, and then you have just to fill in the blanks with choices. Okay, and there are 40 questions. So this section has not changed. It is the same. So it is incomplete sentences with 40 questions. Now the change starts with the second section. In the past, students had to do error recognition. So what do you mean by error recognition? Which means that they had 20 questions, and then they had just to look for the mistake. Okay, you find words which are underlined. Okay, and they have just to let's say to find the mistake, what we call the error recognition. So this section has been deleted and replaced by another one which is called text completion, okay, in which the students have to do 12 questions. And the last part, it's a reading comprehension questions. Reading comprehension questions in which the students have to do 40 questions. Now, this section or this part of the reading test has been actually more developed. Now the students, they have to do single passages, 28 questions, about 10 or between 7 and 10 reading texts with between 2 and 5 questions each. Okay, they can have double passages, 20 questions, 4 pairs of reading text with 5 questions per pair. Right. Now, the structure of the tests, it consists, as I said, of 100 questions presented in the written format in the text booklet. So there are 3 passages. The first one, 40 questions. The second one, 12 questions. The third one, you have, about 48 questions, 28 questions in the first section, and 20 questions in the second section, within the third part of the reading tests. Okay, so this is actually now you can see in front of you the TOEIC score. Okay, so each candidate, after doing the test, each candidate is going just to receive independent scores for both listening and reading comprehension on a scale from 5 to 495 points. So the total score adds up to a scale from 10 to 990. Okay, so here this is actually the analysis or the interpretation of the different scores that students can get. Okay, so let's start from the bottom. So here, as you can see in the bottom, if the students let's say do between 0 and 25%, so that's what we call a basic proficiency, which means that they are able to satisfy immediate survival needs. Okay, so if they manage to do 45 or 40% of the test, so they have got an elementary proficiency level, which means that the speaker has functional but limited proficiency, and they are able to maintain very simple face-to-face conversations on familiar topics. And if they manage to do, let's say, up to 60%, that's an elementary proficiency, but plus, okay, which means that they can initiate and maintain predictable face-to-face conversations and satisfy limited social demands. Some students, they manage to get between 61 and 78%, and that's called limited working proficiency. What do we mean by limited working proficiency? We mean simply that students are able to satisfy most social demands and limited work requirements. Okay. Other students, can get between 79 and 90%, which means that they are able to satisfy most work requirements with language that is often but not always acceptable and effective, and we call this working proficiency plus. Okay, and the most successful, or I would say the brilliant students, are those who have got an international professionals or professional proficiency, which means that they are able to communicate effectively in any situation. The second test, which is very common in Morocco, which is the TOEFL, and the TOEFL, as you can see from the slide, is a test which is an internationally accepted standard of English that measures the academic English proficiency of a non-native speaker of English. The TOEFL test is required by more than 7,000 colleges, universities, and licensing agencies in 110 countries throughout the world. And as you know, the TOEFL test is very common among students who want to continue their studies in the United States. Okay, now the students after grade 12, so they start preparing and doing the test, okay, to get a good score to join colleges and universities in the United States. Okay. Now let's have a look at the TOEFL test format. Okay, so as you can see in the slide, the TOEFL test is available in two ways. So the first one is an international testing program, which is the CBT. And what do you mean by CBT? It means the computer-based, or IBT. Okay, IBT means internet-based tests. And we have got the TOEFL PNP, which is the PNB, which is the paper-based test. Okay, and actually now the paper-based tests is no more, I wouldn't say no more available, because there are some schools which offer this test. Okay, and mostly the students have to do the IBT, and the internet-based test now, it's very common in Morocco, and once you do it, then the score can be actually forwarded to the college or university that the student wants to continue his or her studies in. Right. Now, what is the purpose of the TOEFL? Actually, the TOEFL measures the ability of non-native speakers of English to use and understand English as it is spoken, written and heard in college and university setting, okay? As opposed to the TOEIC test, which is test of English for international communication, that measures the use of English in a business context. The TOEFL test has an academic focus, and this is actually the main difference from between the first test that I explained to you, which is the TOEIC, and the second one. So the TOEIC test is 100% professional, which can be used in a business context, but the TOEFL is 100% academic. Right. Now, we're going now just to have a look at the IBT TOEFL, which is the internet-based test. As you can see, there is a difference between the TOEIC and the TOEFL, because the TOEIC you have two parts, but here there are 4 parts: the reading, the listening, the speaking, and the writing. Now, how many number of questions can a student have in the reading? Okay, so first of all, there are between 3 and 5 passages, which means between 12 and 14 questions each. And the students have to do it, you know, in about 1 hour, or let's say between 60 and 100 minutes. Once they finish, they move on to the listening, and in the listening you can find between 4 and 6 lectures, okay, and 6 questions each, which have to be done between 60 and 90 minutes. Then there is the speaking part, okay, so there are 6 parts. 2 independent and 4 integrated, and the students have to do it in 20 minutes. And for the writing, there are 2 writings, 2 types of writing. The first one, which is called the integrated task, okay, which has to be done in 20 minutes, and the second one is called the independent task, which has to be done in 30 minutes. Right. As I explained to you, there is a big difference between the TOEIC and the TOEFL. Now let's move on to the third test, which I would like just to give an idea to you about it, which is called the IELTS. And what is the IELTS? The IELTS is the International English Language Testing System, and more or less it's like the TOEFL, because here you can find that the students have to do 4 parts. Part 1, which is the listening, part 2, the reading, part 3, the writing, and part 4, the speaking. Okay, so the listening is actually shorter than the listening of the TOEFL, and here they have just to spend about 30 minutes, The reading once again is shorter, but you have just to do it in 60 minutes, in 1 hour, and the writing, the students have to do it in 60 minutes, 1 hour, and the speaking is between 11 and 14 minutes. So the total test time, it's about 2 hours and 45 minutes, of course, excluding breaks, because you can have a break time, okay, and the students, you know, can take about 14, 15 till 20 minutes, 20 minutes break. Okay. Now let's try just to see the test format part by part. Okay, so the first one is the listening. Okay, and as I said, the listening has to be done in 30 minutes. So you can find section 1, section 2, section 3, and section 4. So in the first section, the students has to listen to a conversation between two people set in an everyday social context, okay? And then they have to do 10 questions, okay? Once they finish, they have just to move to the second section, which is about a monologue, which is set in an everyday social context. For example, a speech about local facilities, okay? And here they have just to do, once again, 10 questions, okay? So from section 1 to section 2, the students have already done 20 questions. And then they move to the third section, section 3. So in this section, as you can see, the students have to listen to a conversation between up to 4 people set in an educational or training context. For example, university tutor and the student discussing an assignment, okay? And once again, the students have to do this task. Let's say they have to do this task, and they have to answer 10 questions. And the last part, which is section 4, and in section 4, it's about a monologue, and a monologue on an academic subject, for example, a university lecture. And once again, as all the other sections, the students have to do 10 questions. So altogether, the students have to do 40 questions. And once they finish, they have to move on to the reading. And in front of you, you can see the reading test format, which has to be done in 1 hour, 60 minutes. So the reading component consists of 40 questions. When I say 40 questions, but 3 different articles. So a variety of question types is used in order to test a wide range of reading skills. And when I said a variety of questions, you can find fill in the blanks, you can find match the headings, you can find true, false, not given questions. Okay, so a variety of question types which are used in order to test a wide range of reading skills. So these include reading for gist, reading for main ideas, reading for detail, skimming, understanding logical argument, recognizing writers' opinions, attitudes, and purposes. So the academic version includes 3 long texts with 3 different topics, which range from the descriptive and factual to the discursive and analytical. The texts are authentic and are taken from books, journals, magazines, and newspapers. So why I said that the texts are authentic and they are taken from books, journals, magazines, and newspapers, which means that if students are used to reading books, journals, magazines, and newspapers, so the reading test will be very easy for them. Then let's move on to the writing part of the IELTS test. So the writing part of the IELTS test lasts 60 minutes, 1 hour. So the writing component of the IELTS academic includes only 2 tasks. Okay, so topics are of general interest to and suitable for candidates entering undergraduate and postgraduate studies, or seeking professional registration. Okay, now what is the difference between task 1 and task 2 in the writing section? So task 1, you will be presented with a graph table, chart, or a diagram and asked to describe, summarize, or explain the information in your own words. You may be asked to describe and explain data, describe the stages of a process, how something works, or describe an object or event. So this task, let's say, is very specific, and the students have to master the vocabulary describing trends, okay, in order just to do well this first task. And as I said, the first task has to be done in 20 minutes. Now let's move on to the second task. So in this task, you will be asked to write an essay in response to a point of view, argument, or problem. Responses to both tasks must be in a formal style. So this task has to be done in 40 minutes. Okay. So this is all about the writing. Now let's move on to the speaking, which has to be done, in 14 minutes maximum, actually between 11 and 14 minutes. So the speaking component assesses your use of spoken English and takes between 11 and 14 minutes to complete. So every test is recorded. So the speaking component is delivered in such a way that it does not allow candidates to rehearse set responses beforehand. So the test consists of 3 parts. Part 1. In this part, the examiner will ask you general questions about yourself and a range of familiar topics. For example, can you present yourself? Where do you live? Can you describe where you live? What's your job? Okay. How do you go to school? Can you generally these topics, they are very familiar, okay? They can ask you about your home, your family, your work, studies, interests, okay? For example, if you study at university, how do you go to university? You can talk about the different means of transport, etc. So this part lasts between 4 and 5 minutes. Once you finish, you move on to the second part. So what is the second part about? So in the second part, you will be given a card, okay, which asks you to talk about a particular topic. You will have 1 minute to prepare before speaking for up to 2 minutes. So when I said 1 minute to prepare, so the students don't have just to write everything they want to say. No, they have just to take notes, okay? They have just to put 3-4 notes, and then they have just to try to elaborate on those ideas they put. So the examiner will then ask 1 or 2 questions on the same topic to finish this part of the test. And then we move on to the last part of the speaking test. So in the last part of the speaking test, you will be asked further questions connected to the topic in part 2. So if the topic you talked about in part 2 is about means of transport in your city, then you will have other questions, further questions connected to the same topic. So these questions will give you the opportunity to discuss more abstract ideas and issues, and the part of the test lasts between 4 and 5. So this is all about the IELTS test. So let's recapitulate. So the IELTS is like the TOEFL. The students have to do 4 parts: listening parts, reading, writing, and the speaking. Though there is, a difference between the 2 tests, okay? But both tests try to examine the 4 skills of the language. So today I have talked about the different language certificates, and I have given importance to 3. The first one was the TOEIC, the second one the TOEFL, and the third one the IELTS. So for next time, I will try just to show you some techniques of TOEIC test, and after we are going just to move on to the techniques that you can use to do the TOEFL test in a very good way. And the last lesson will be about the ICE techniques, and once we finish everything, then we can move on to an application. So thank you very much for your listening and for your presence, and see you next week, inshallah.